Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. Here we speak with the top voices and luminaries in the FMCG and retail industries on a bi-weekly basis. Every Wednesday and every Saturday, a brand new episode. I'm Daniel Torres, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Efrain Rosario. Hey, Efrain, how are you?
Good, Daniel. Nice to be with you as always.
Likewise. So we've spoken a lot lately about e-commerce, also about supermarkets and the relationship between FMCGs and the trade. But today we'll speak about a different type of trade, which is traditional trade. What can you tell me about this channel?
Well, I can tell you that it is something that big FMCGs, everybody from Unilever to the Coca-Colas to the Unilevers of the world pay very close attention to, particularly in emerging markets such as Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, where traditional trade, i.e. mom and pops, independent shops, can make up a significant portion of total goods in terms of sales, right? I mean, I saw something the other day that said that close to 75% of FMCG goods in India are moved through a mom and pop store at Kirana in that market. So it's something you can't ignore and something you definitely that has to be part of your strategy.
Yeah, no, and it's been cool this year because I think that we've put more and more light on this. Like we spoke with Alessandro Boffi from Mondelez about developing that channel, with Peter Vasiliev as well, about image recognition, which can really help you boost results in these channels, which we have to remember are predominant in the growth markets of FMCGs. And in these days where growth is definitely not taken for granted, I think it's worth putting the eye on that. So to talk about that, we have a real expert on the topic, coming all the way from Chiang Mai, Thailand. It's Brett Joyal. Hi, Brett. How are you?
Hi, Danielle. I'm very good. Thank you. It's good to be with you. Hi, Efrain.
Did I say the surname well, by the way?
It was pronounced perfectly, which is rare. Well done.
I meant to ask you before we started recording, but I didn't, so I had to gamble. So Brett, how important is traditional trade for FMCGs? Or how important should it be?
Yeah, well, I would just have to add to what Efrain was correctly pointing out. There's quite a lot of numbers and statistics that we can quote, but I think one of the things that sets the importance of the emerging market out, because I think we have to look at the global market in general and realize that 70% of the world's population lives in an emerging or developing market, and that's where all the people are. And if we then put it into industry context, but 7 out of 10 people are actually living in some type of an emerging or global market, and they live on relatively small GDPs per capita. And something that's universal about that population is that none of them wants to be poor. And we can pretty much take it for granted that as a universal truth for all of us is that every one of that 70% of the globe's population doesn't want to be a poor person anymore and is working to not be poor. And that is going to be one of the biggest trends shaping all of our lives for the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah, well, it's actually really happened now in the last decades, where in the news we normally hear about the bad news, but it is true that in the last decades we've seen a huge population going out of poverty and into a certain middle class, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great thing. And there are just so many different organizations and people that are working to alleviate that poverty, and that is a very good thing. And the poverty rates have declined. COVID has put a dent in that, but that'll come back.
Oh, really?
But there was a blog post that just came out from the IMF recently that said that 80% of global economic growth is going to come from emerging and developing economies. 80%. Yeah. So whatever industry we're in, but especially I would say in FMCG, whatever industry we're in, we're really going to have to pay attention to these pockets of the world.
Absolutely. And I imagine, one of the old sayings in trade marketing is, go where the customer or the consumer is, right? So my sense is in the role of these mom and pop shops in consumers' lives in these markets, that's where you got to be, right? I mean, it serves as a hub in some ways for consumers.
Yeah, and that term that you use, Kirana, that's the term they use in India for the neighborhood mom and pop shop. They call them sari-saris in the Philippines. They call them warangs in Indonesia. Every country has its own name for it, right? But it means the neighborhood, the neighborhood shop. And a neighborhood, it's actually an entire ecosystem, if you think about it, because those neighborhoods are not dominated by any type of a chain, which means that each family business is actually spending money at the family business next door, and that same dollar is circulating through that community economy. And so these Kiranas, these warangs, these sari-saris, they're quite critical, and that is where the shopper is. So if you're an FMCG brand, you got to figure out, okay, how do I get to those people, and how do I learn what their trends are and what they want to have and what's their unmet need, and how well is my brand performing? That's a key question.
Yeah, and you're now the founder and CEO of Mom and Pop, which we'll definitely talk about. But you have a very interesting background where you were before you became an entrepreneur. You were working at DKSH. You worked at Deloitte before. So tell us shortly about your background before becoming a founder.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for that. I had actually an early career in. I come from a family of small business owners, and a lot of time growing up in different parts of different family businesses within my family. I was in small mom and pop retail through high school years and part-time work, and then through university, and then I was in the food and beverage industry for 10 years. All of it small restaurant, small F&B. So a long background for me in the mom and pop space before I actually then went into the corporate world for a good 14 years. And the corporate world eventually led me into Southeast Asia, and then it took me into a company called DKSH, which you had mentioned. And DKSH is the largest distribution company in Southeast Asia for healthcare and for FMCG. And through that role, I worked across the APAC region, but my primary focus area was Indochina. And as you start moving into that space, you find yourself back at your roots of the small business. And 80% of my sales were basically going through independent family neighborhood mom and pop shops that are operating like it's 1950.
Yeah. If anyone wants to learn more about DKSH, we actually interviewed who at the time was their chief strategy officer, Martin Fresh, on the show. So if anyone wants to learn more about that business, which is a fascinating business, you should listen to that.
It's a 150-year-old company, and it's publicly traded, Swiss company. They've been here for a very long time. It's a very interesting company.
So, Brett, so I imagine that, like you said, after 14 years in the corporate world, having made the move across the world to Asia, tell us how you came about to starting and to founding Mom and Pop, because it sounds like it's almost like a perfect combination of your experience in corporate combined with a passion from earlier on in small business.
I couldn't set it any better than that. So pretty much that's it. I mean, part of it's personal because, again, growing up with, have a background of a lot of small businesses in my family. But I also, one of the things that I grew up with was alongside an agency in North Carolina, where I'm from, which is called the North Carolina Small Business Technology Development Center. And it is a joint venture between the state of North Carolina and the university system, and they provide free business consulting to small businesses. And the objective of that is to help them be more profitable and create more jobs, and thereby create more tax receipts for the government. And it's been a profoundly successful program. and a family member of mine founded that agency, and I grew up inside of it. So I came from a family of small businesses. I grew up in that agency. That agency was in lots and lots of term papers in university and graduate school. I interned there. I did research projects there. And, the small business is a bit of the underdog, right? The small business, they always get the high street, the main street is always wiped out by the corporate titan. Eventually, you can't withstand the tide of or the effects of consolidated corporate capital. It's very difficult to fight that over the long term. So there's a bit of an underdog story there for small businesses. And what we found in the emerging market is they're very much operating like it's 1950, but the technology that we can put in their hands today, the prevalence of internet, the prevalence and the affordability of data, the ease with which we can develop mobile applications, it's transformative potentially for small businesses and could let them network in ways and get digitized in ways that were just never possible before. So what we think, our hypothesis is actually we could transform the trajectory of economic growth. That's really what we believe is possible by, putting technology in the hands of, highly motivated group of small business owners in these emerging markets.
Yeah, so maybe you can tell us a bit more about what Mom and Pops actually offers and does.
Okay, sure. Well, if you think about it, we were talking about those huge populations, and we were talking about the importance, of the emerging and developed markets. There's one trend specific to FMCG that we want to make note of, which was last year in 2023, for the first time ever, the emerging markets took 51% of FMCG sales.
Wow.
So for the first time ever last year, the emerging market actually took the majority. And as I'd already mentioned, the IMF projects that 80% of global economic growth is going to come out of these markets. And another, I am going to throw one more statistic, and then I will tell you about what's in there. But 80% of the people living in those markets shop at mom and pop shops. Okay. And we already have underlined their importance, but therein is their importance. And the problem, the challenge for a brand is that they're all disconnected. So there's there's 8 million of them in the ASEAN, Southeast Asia region alone, right? And those numbers will probably be similar in Africa and similar in Central and South America. And it's very difficult for the brand because they're going to use a distributor or multiple distributors in a country. And then they're going to use thousands and thousands and thousands of wholesalers and intermediaries to get to millions of retailers. And a lot of those retailers are also going to be intermediaries, which means that, if you're a brand, the number one thing you want to be is directly connected to your end consumer. So you can know, do they really like my Coca-Cola? And I want a one-to-one relationship with them. But you come into these emerging markets, the brands are so disconnected from them. It's difficult to know how well their brand is performing because there's no data. It's difficult to know the ROI on their spend. It's difficult to know how well their partners are performing. So for a brand, it's a huge challenge to operate in these markets. On the other side of that is the shop itself, which is actually doesn't understand double entry accounting, doesn't do inventory management, and is still operating like it's 1950. And how are you going to start to draw those two groups closer together so that there's more efficiency? And that's where Mom and Pop focuses. And our approach is a little different from some of the others in that we focus on digitizing the retailer themselves. So the solutions that we have built are to help the small business actually modernize and start to track and manage their inventory. And we make a very simple promise to them: use our system for 6 to 12 months and you'll increase your profits by 5 to 10%.
That's a pretty powerful statement, particularly when you're talking about, places that are probably operating on razor thin margins.
Can be, yeah, I think so. But so far, since we've launched the application, it's doing that. We have our longest used shop has had 22% profit margin increases, and the core users are anywhere from 2.5% to 8.5% over a 4+ month period of usage. It's too soon to say it's a causal linkage. But, Efrain, before we actually get into how much we're increasing their profits for the first time ever, they actually know what their sales are, let alone what their sales are, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to say, I mean, I think obviously one benefit is increased profitability, incremental revenue. But I think just before that, like you said, it's about the visibility that they're able to get in terms of like, how they're running their business. And, they don't have to be data scientists to be able to do this, my guess is, right? So I'm assuming that part of the appeal is also the user friendliness of the applications and the platform you guys are able to provide.
Yeah, I hope you don't mind me using what you just said in our marketing, because I couldn't have said it better myself. We put the data science at the back end of the platform, so that they don't have to be business analysts. Let's be frank here. We're talking about 12 million Kirana shops in India. We're talking about 3.5 million in Indonesia. So again, it's 8 million across Southeast Asia alone. They're not going to become accountants overnight. Most of them don't even have laptops. They're not going to become inventory managers. So the solution that we've built actually does that for them, and it puts it in their hands. And they have some work to do, for sure. And this is not like 8 million shops are going to adopt this tomorrow. We very much focus on the Pareto outlets. So we are looking for the outlet owner who understands that she's got a lot of profit left on the table that she needs to get and that she can get, and she's motivated to do it. And we're now giving her the ability to do it. And that motivation plus the ability is what will generate the habit of actually modernizing the business.
And how does it work, like from a logistics standpoint?
Well, it's no different than any major FMCG brand that sells in these markets. They do it on foot and they go shop to shop. That's how Nestle sells coffee, is they go on foot, shop to shop. Hundreds of thousands of sales reps go out every day across these countries, visiting millions of retailers to sell Nescafe coffee. Mom and Pop is no different. So we're on foot and we profile the outlets. And we do have certain data markers we're looking for, which indicates the shop is multi-category and they have a certain size and a certain volume. There's a little bit of an interview questionnaire, and it's very data driven for us. We're constantly beta testing. We're constantly refining what the ideal shop profile is. But what you're looking for is somebody that has a high probability of actually adopting an inventory management solution and staying with it, because that's how they're going to identify the benefits. But Daniel, the logistics of it it's very much on foot, door to door.
But I've seen that on, like, in terms of like the application of it in the store, they have like these barcode scanners and they connect it to their mobiles, right?
That's right. Yeah, the application is completely free to the shop owner. There's no charge for the system. We felt that was critical for mass adoption. You actually, it's all loaded off Google Play Store, so it's open source. And it's fairly intuitive. We're constantly working on it to make it more intuitive, but we do provide them with training, and we're constantly adding to the ease of use and the self-learning components of it. The camera works as a barcode scanner, Efrain. So
wow.
It's actually built for effectively millions of shops potentially someday. But the camera tech and the software tech is a little slow. So it works, you can plug a barcode scanner right into the bottom of your phone, and you can do a transaction in 7 seconds, which was basically the standard that we set, which was what you would get at an Aldi or at a Walmart or a Tesco or a 7-Eleven. You could buy a single item and pay cash in 7 seconds. So that's the standard that we set. And the shop typically buys the hardware, and that's anywhere from a $17 to a $30 barcode scanner. And they're off and running.
Yeah, and if, as you said, if they're able to increase profits by 5 to 10%, that payback period is days, if not maybe even less than 1 day to pay back.
That's a great point. And not only that, I think we have to make sure that we have the right idea in mind. Sometimes when we think about mom and pop shops in emerging markets. We're thinking about a tiny cubbyhole selling bananas and a few sachets of Nescafe. We actually have shops that are doing $3,000 a month to $25,000 a month, right? So these are not micro businesses selling, bananas on the side of the street. So these are real businesses.
So, Brett, obviously there's benefit there for the retailer in terms of operational efficiency gains and obviously incremental revenues as well. I'm curious to hear about what are the benefits also for the brands that sell to these retailers as well.
Sure. Well, I think, if you look at it from the biggest picture, if 80% of your sales is going through a channel that's not digitized, then you're not able to get data on what's going on there. So Coca-Cola can buy data from Tesco, and they know that Tesco is X% of the UK market, and then they basically can get fantastic data on the competitor, and they know their market share, and it's all done in seconds. You come into an emerging market, that data is not available. And so knowing your market share is a crapshoot at best, right? Because you're going to get a physically collected, physically audited, sample that's done by a person that's asking a shop owner that doesn't keep track of their sales, what their estimated sales were last month for your particular product. So having accuracy on your market share and being able to track your market share over time, and what's the effect of price changes? What's the effect of your trade marketing schemes? What's the effect of your above the line marketing? It's impossible to get your ROI, quite frankly, because you just can't see what's going on there. And that's at the retail level. You can forget at the consumer level. There's no connection. So by digitizing the retailer, and again, we focused on the Pareto. It's really important to point that out. We distribute geographically. We look for multi-category outlets. So we go after the bigger ones first. But what that starts to give the brand is they can start getting actual sellout because the transaction is recorded. And so they can start to see actual sales. And for the first time ever in an emerging market, they can get basket analytics. So they can actually start to see what's going in the basket and what's going in the basket at the same time as other things and what kinds of days, right? And this starts to provide a level of granularity of detail in an emerging market that, you just can't get here. It's just not available. It's never been available.
No, absolutely. It's often been a blind spot for many FMCG brands. And as part of your service, do you also offer some of that cross outlet analytics? Like, do you roll up that data and offer it to brands so they're able to look at it across the thousands of outlets where they're selling?
Sure. I mean, that's how we monetize the platform, right? Is you monetize the data out to the FMCG brands. So it's free to the user, right? And their data is anonymized, and their individual data is never shared. But with that, you can give the brands an enormous amount of information about market share. You can break it down geographically. You can start to show trends, and you can immediately start to show the effect of a trade scheme. You can immediately start to show the effect of a price change. You can start to see the immediate effect of your competitor's price change. So those are the kinds of things, and we make all that available on desktop, immediate live through web-enabled dashboards. So this is not something that you need to wait a couple weeks for a PowerPoint. This is all streamed live to desktop. I think some of the other functionality that hopefully we get a chance to come back to talk to you about, and if you'll have us back in 6, 9, 12 months, is that by the adoption of this, the shop owner actually can start, the brand and the shop owner, or the brand and the wholesaler can communicate directly. As in, the brands can start to communicate their promotions and product information directly to the user. And that's an extraordinary new ability to do that, because right now, to communicate a trade scheme in a market with 1 million outlets, you got to have 30,000 sales reps walking shop to shop to tell each shop about the trade promotion. It's the only way to tell them. And then they pull out a piece of paper and say, would you like me to order for you? That's how it's done today. Through the digitization, that trade scheme can actually be pushed out digitally to the shop owner. The brands can start to see what kind of eyeballs are going on to that. And then, eventually as the functionality expands, and we're already in the pilots for that, this will allow the wholesalers and the brands to order direct from the wholesaler or direct from the brand or the distributor. So it's an important component here is we're agnostic on brand and distributor and on wholesale. And that's a really important point. We talked earlier about lots and lots of different companies are trying to put out similar solutions, but they tend to come from a single company's perspective, which means that the shop owner is only going to be able to manage that supplier's products and only be able to order that supplier's products. Whereas, in our type of solution, it's a true aggregator.
Well, I think that the cool thing about your solution, and it's the reason why, full disclosure, I got in touch with you, Brett, and I liked what you guys are doing, is that I think it's very customer centric, and that customer is the small independent shop owner, right? So it's all about empowering that type of business and helping them basically do more business and better business as well, ultimately. And I think that that's why you have like this kind of flywheel, like virtuous circle, which ultimately benefits everyone, right?
Well, it's very gratifying to hear that, Daniel. I appreciate that. That's, actually enabling and empowering that community is an important part of what we're doing. Because if they don't get help, they do go extinct after a long period of time, and they are an important part of the economy. And I think we have an opportunity to do things differently in this next wave of economic growth. Let's see. But that's one of the things we try to do is we are focusing on retailer solutions, but we are mindful at the same time that we want to be helpful to the brand. There's no choice but to be helpful to the brand. I think one thing we didn't mention is one of the characteristics is that these mom and pop shops don't have access to financing. They don't have access to banking. And so that's a whole different industry discussion, really, but they're mostly unbanked, right? And they might have bank accounts, and they're now increasingly using money transfer applications, but they have no access to financing, to credit for the purchase of inventory. So some of their suppliers will give them credit, but that's only for that supplier's products. And trade marketing, you mentioned the frame, trade marketing is very interesting because my job used to be to build trade marketing schemes to get shops to load up on 2, 3, 4 months of stock on the particular products that I was distributing. And we might have credit for that, but oftentimes it's on cash, and then they can't buy the other category of products, and you end up with a vicious cycle of being out of stock. And effectively, it's very different for the manufacturers as well, because they have a hard time. Their average volumes don't change month to month, but because of the trade schemes, they go up and down. They zigzag like a heart patient having cardiac arrest. And it's tough for the manufacturer to manufacture against that schedule. So one of the things we're doing with digitization was we finally give these shops access to banking and to accessing credit.
No, it's like what you said before. This is a true underdog story, what you're doing by bringing these services through digital tools that basically are on par with what the large store competition is already using. It's aspirational, but it's also something that a lot of people like us can get behind as well. So with that in mind, I'm curious to hear, where are you in the process of developing and expanding Mom and Pop? So I think you mentioned before we started recording that you guys are in the process of fundraising. So can you tell us a little bit more about where you guys are in that process?
Sure. Well, businesses like ours, we are revenue generative, and so we do make substantial revenues off of the business that we've been running. But at the same time, to achieve the conversion into full data science and software led, we do need capital investment. So we are raising funds. I would say we're pretty close to closing our seed round right now, or our second angel round. We'll probably close that in the next month and a half. That will take care of us for the next 9 to 12 months. That lets us scale the digital solution in Cambodia and Myanmar, continue our penetration into Thailand. And then we're now in discussions for either licensing or JVs in Vietnam. And there's a lot of investment interest for Mom and Pop in Indonesia. And Indonesia is very special. It's half the Southeast Asia population. It has 3.5 million outlets. If you were to speak to a VC about which market in Southeast Asia they're going to do something in, it's definitely going to be Indonesia because of the scale. It's an incredibly difficult place. It's very diverse. It's across thousands and thousands of islands, and so you've got to get things by boat. And it's a tough place to work. It's very crowded, torrential, weather, these kinds of things. But that's where we're going to go to next. So Efrain, if anybody's listening that's interested, we never stop fundraising, of course, unfortunately. And at the same time, we never stop monetizing what we're doing. But the growth story is exciting because the mom and pop, are all over Southeast Asia, and we do have interest, actually from Africa as well, because the conditions there, every country is different, but the operating conditions for the mom and pop are relatively universal, and the challenge of serving them is relatively universal. So we do have some interest from Africa now to take the solution there. So there's a lot of excitement for us as a company.
Yeah.
And then, of course, just the day-to-day challenges of making it all work.
Of course, which it's challenging itself as a business to make it grow, to make it to get the early adopters and so on. But then there's also the financing part, which is the other side. So I think Efrain and I we bought into the mission. So if anyone else is interested, we'll leave your name, Brett, in the digital liner notes, or you can just look for his very unique name on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you'll find him. So if you want to get in touch, do so. And Brett, you've done both entrepreneurial work, corporate work in your career. If you had to go back to yourself at the very beginning of it, what's that one piece, and it can only be one piece of advice you would give yourself?
It's a great question. It's a tough question. I would say, don't worry about the money. Don't worry too much when you're starting out about the money. Find something interesting that you really like doing and that you're good at, and that really gets you out of bed in the morning. And don't worry too much about the money, because the money, the passion will keep you going, and the money follows at some point in the future. But money's not the most important thing in the world. You said I could only say one, but the second thing would be don't accumulate too much debt so that you don't have to worry too much about the money. So a lot of people starting in their careers are starting with a lot of debt, and that drives what things they can do. But I would say don't just chase the money. Chase something interesting. Chase something life-changing.
And the learning experiences, right? Which is something that Efrain and I do a lot on this podcast. So we're going to try to summarize our learnings in this conversation. Efrain, what are your key takeaways? We have some interesting numbers of growth. I mean, I think that definitely FMCGs seem to be overlooking emerging markets a little bit, no?
Well, I think I don't know if I would say that they're being overlooked, but I think when you see the scale of what they are, particularly when you're talking about it from a growth perspective, and obviously that's going to depend on your category, but when you kind of reach that tipping point where they become the majority of the growth for some of these FMCG categories, all of a sudden the lights go off for a lot of people, not just in marketing, but across the organization. So for me, that was a big eye opener. And that's the kind of killer fact you can put in front of your CFO, in front of your marketing director, in front of anybody in the company, and they're going to stand up and pay attention.
Yeah, because everybody's talking about data, but what happens if you're selling your product to a distributor and then you don't actually know where your products are getting sold, right?
Well, absolutely. And I think, to not only is the growth coming from these markets, but if you think then about, we said, go where the shopper is, this is where commerce is happening, is in these mom and pop, this traditional trade. And, you have an opportunity to, by means of working smarter using technology, you're able to drive footfall, you're able to drive frequency and weight of purchase. I mean, it's all the levers that a brand has at their disposal are things that are being impacted, by, let's be honest, it's not as sexy as a cat of a channel as ecom is for a lot of people, but you see that the scale is there, right? And there is a opportunity for growth as well. So to me, it's really, really exciting, and it's a good reminder. I remember being at another FMCG earlier in my career, and we paid a lot of attention to traditional trade, but it's always nice to kind of remind yourself. So I'm really appreciative of some of the facts you shared with us, Brett, on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like you're right about e-commerce, that e-commerce, people like it because you get a lot of data, right? You get and you get it at the moment. And traditional trade is like the other extreme, like there's not much data, and you get it like you're selling through someone else that sells through someone else as well, right? So
but it's interesting, right? I mean, it's like, so yes, we're talking e-commerce, but let's, I think the percentage, and I think it's somewhere around 70% of total sales that are digitally enabled is where a lot of the growth is going to be, right? So whether or not it's fulfilled through online or through an e-commerce channel, whether it's a sale that's fulfilled through a physical outlet and it is digitally enabled, there's probably more of the latter than there is of the former. So it's a big opportunity. And I think what's really exciting about what Mom and Pop is doing is that they are bringing, again, some of those same digital tools and platforms to a space that is, hasn't had them in the past, right? So I think you combine all those things: emerging market, large, but let's say under-resourced trade channel, technology. You combine those three things together, and it's really, really exciting.
And huge populations as well, right? So
let's not forget that as well. I mean, was it 70% of the population lives in those emerging markets? I mean, my gosh. It's like we all know, obviously, markets like India, Indonesia are large population centers, but again,
Cambodia, Myanmar.
It's almost staggering to hear those kinds of figures. So as Daniel, as you said, Daniel, it's like I think you and I are really excited about the mission that Mom and Pop shared with us today. Hopefully some of that is coming through in terms of some of our takeaways for other folks. But as you said, for anybody who's interested in learning more about this and the Mom and Pop mission, we'll put in the liner notes, we'll put contact information for you to reach out to Brett as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brett, you already said that maybe you'll be back in 6 or 9 months. So we'll have to talk about that towards the end of the year.
Hey, you guys are so sharp, both of you, and you guys ask great questions. You know where the pain points are. It's really fascinating to hear your views, and I thank you for having us. I would just remind you that next week we are launching a loyalty program for consumers. So when you guys come into the emerging markets, you can download the Mom and Pop loyalty application and actually go to the Mom and Pop shop. And if they're participating in it, you actually might be able to participate in this part of the economy.
Okay. Well, actually, by the time this podcast goes out, it will have been launched. So when it launches, Brett, do send it to us, and it will be in the digital liner notes of this as well.
Yeah, we'd love to come back and talk to you in 6-9 months.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Brett, for joining us. Thanks, Efrain. Good to see you guys. Thanks to our audience as well. If you enjoyed this show, remember to leave us a review, which will help the show appear on more people's feed, and more people in the consumer goods and retail community can benefit from the learnings that we get from the likes of Brett. So it's not only us that get it, but it's more and more people in the community, which is growing slowly but surely. So thanks again for joining, and we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys.